Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Moxtober Daily Recaps. For those of you who don't know, Moxtober is an annual event where for each day of the month of October, there's a different one-word prompt, and based on that prompt, people do various creative endeavors related to the game of Magic the Gathering. Most people make custom card designs, which is what we review in these daily recap videos, but people also draw art, write articles, make deck lists, anything creative related to the game. I'm joined here with Ancestral of MTG.design, and today's prompt is sweet. If you want to see the designer credits for any and all of the designs we talk about today, as well as the full files we pull these designs from, and instructions on how you can submit your own cards to be in those files to potentially be featured in a future episode, check the description for all of that. But that being said, let's get into our first design for the day. And for this one, let's go to the mtg.design file and look at Ryssa Mystical Cuisinier. Okay. So, what immediately caught my eye about this design was a line of text. Whenever one or more foods you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. Now that is how you hook a reader's attention. When you're like, wait, that foods don't do that. Like, we have ginger brewed, but like, what's going on here? And then you have the second ability, tap any number of food tokens you control, become 1/1 golem creatures with haste in addition to their other types. So essentially shaping them into ginger brutes. And then you can pay black, discard a card, create 2 food tokens. So you can turn your hand into a little army of like um, food tokens, which then can get you back dividends in terms of like the card advantage they give you. I think you could probably, if you're going to have 1 black mana, you could probably increase the cost on the ability a little bit more, especially since it isn't a tap ability. But I think the overall play pattern of this is super clean, and I think that it has that hook, which I think a lot of designs fail to get. And it puts together a lot of like little complex effects to a good package without taking up too much text space. You will see a lot of times designs that maybe when you take all of them in, it's a super flavorful package, but looking at the tiny text gives you an absolute headache. And I think this manages that text length problem pretty effectively. But yeah, overall a design that I'm a big fan of.
I like that you can animate food. Um, it's it's something we really haven't seen specifically. I mean, we've been able to animate artifacts in blue for quite a while. So this sort of has, touches all parts of the colors here. You've got um, drawing a card based off of the creatures dealing damage and specifically foods dealing damage, and that feels pretty green. Having them turn into 1/1s, which is kind of blue, and then you got the discard effect in black, and they kind of complement each other. Like you have to discard cards to get food, but then when your foods deal damage, then you get to draw a card. So obviously that kind of feeds off of each other, which there's a little bit of an engine there. So good job with that. I think the discard. I don't know. Paying a black and discarding a card for 2 foods feels kind of strong, but it's really hard to say because I mean certainly we've got we sort of have the thrill of possibility effect where you discard a card and draw 2 cards. So I guess in a way, creating 2 food tokens, is a food token better than a card in your hand? And probably the answer is no there, but
Yeah, I think the main thing
um,
is you probably just, since it isn't a tap ability, you just wait until a turn cycle passes, go to your turn, sink a bunch of black and discard like all or most of your hand into food tokens, and then you can turn them in because the golems have haste when you tap her, and then you can just
mhm.
curiosity them all over the place. Of course, you open yourself up to instant speed removal or cheap wipes, but again, the instant speed or blockers, obviously. But assuming that this is 4 commander with the legendary thing,
Right.
and like the overall like triplicate cost, I could definitely see this being like a like I think that like it could be definitely more than a thrill of possibility because you get to get recurring value on your investment. But yeah, I think
Yeah, and for what
them
it's
being
worth,
1/1s is definitely like a huge safety valve there.
right, and for what it's worth, it is 1 or more foods, so you're only going to draw 1 card from combat damage. So which is
Oh,
which
never
is
mind.
helpful.
Okay, that's one or more foods. Never mind. Then all
Hmm.
of my concerns are it's not a coastal piracy. Okay, never
Where's my
mind then.
cute little ginger brute? So I like that.
In that case, this is like perfectly costed, and I retract any like power level concern or whatever. Yeah, but the core
Hmm.
concept of this is super compelling. So shout out to Art Arthaerus. Hopefully, I'm not butchering that name. But yeah, what is your first card going to be, Ancestral?
Okay, good question here. We're gonna go with Everlasting Gobstopper. This is in MSC. This is 0 mana. You can pay 2, a tap, gain 3 life. This is probably a reference to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which is originally a novel by Roald Dahl, and then obviously they made some movies over the years. And the idea here is that it's a food token, but wait a second, you can tap it and gain 3 life each turn. So the whole idea here is that the food never goes away.
Yeah, I think that this is one of those designs where I think surprisingly I like this, and I say surprisingly because usually I feel like I'm the stickler for like play patterns or whatever. But I feel like this is evidently like more so supposed to be like a showcase or flavor first card than a card that's meant to be played with. And I think for that purpose, it's a really good implementation of the idea of like an everlasting food. Obviously, like a 0 mana pay 2 gain 3 life can sometimes break some aggressive matchups wide open, but I don't think that's relevant here. I also think that I love both the art edit and I love that the art credit is apologies to Ryan Pancoast for the edit because I think that this is it's one of the Moxen from it's the most recent one from MH2. Mox Tantalite, I think, the one with suspend. Um, but yeah, shout out to Wobbles for the design. It's just clean, evocative, and tongue in cheek.
This is probably a nod to Fountain of Youth, which is sort of a classic card. I think it debuted in the Dark, and it's been reprinted a few times. The Fountain of Youth is not quite as strong, but very similar. 0 mana artifact, pay 2 tap to gain 1 life. And I guess you could make an argument that maybe that's a little under curve. We've had some variations of this, of course, over the years, but I think if Wizards has known anything, 0 mana artifacts are in the right deck. They are broken. Um, but the fact that this is legendary sort of helps that out, and it just adds to the flavor, which is fantastic. So I really do like this design, and not sure if Wizards would print this, but they don't have to because these are custom cards.
Yeehaw. Okay, my next card is also going to be from the MSC file. It's going to be Rebirthday Cake. And like, what an amazing pun. Um, so this is X white black. Return target creature card from your grave, or it's supposed to say creature card. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with that has mana value equal to the amount of mana spent to cast Rebirthday Cake. Create a food token. Um, and I like that you can just play this as like you don't have to pay into X. It's not with mana value X, which I think is something that can definitely trip people up. So maybe should be called out a little bit more. But yeah, you can just pay this for 2 mana and return a 2 drop and get a food token. But yeah, I love it's simple, straightforward. Doesn't try to overstay its welcome. Does a really cool effect and has that little dollop of flavor at the very end. So yeah, shout out to Cord22 for this design.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Late to Dinner, which is a pretty recent card from Modern Horizons 2. And that was a 4 mana sorcery, which Wizards has been trying to sort of push that a little bit. I think Resurrect was like the classic. I think that was an alpha card, which was I think 2 and 2 white. But anyway, the flavor obviously is really fun that you get the birthday cake. I do agree with you. The total mana is a little confusing. Probably I would just reword this as like X minus 2 or plus 2 or whatever. Um,
Well, I
but I
think
think
I,
this
think I
is
think total mana cost is a wording that's been used on some canon
oh it
cards.
is yeah. I just think that maybe for players, it might be a little
Yeah,
confusing.
I think just putting it something in reminder text is probably the move. But I could also see doing X minus two. I just think that like anything that gets even mildly mathy is just aesthetically like ah.
Yeah. Otherwise, I think it's totally fine. It's a rare. You could actually be. It could probably even be downshifted, which is we usually don't say that uh, on these reviews because usually the cards we're seeing are just so overwhelmingly powerful. But you know, again, a lot of this stuff would for these are usually one-off designs. They end up in cubes, and um, but the idea of, I guess, regifting a birthday cake. I don't know if that's the flavor here. I mean, it looks the actual cake looks fantastic.
I think it's more just like congratulations on your undead. Have a cake.
Oh, of course. Now I get it. Okay, I see here. It's your second birth.
Yep, yep.
Okay, that makes total sense. All right, all right.
Okay, what is your next card going to be?
Well, let's go with a very simple design. And this is from mtg.design. It's companion. It is one white mana. It's a dog, and it gets +1/+1 as long as you control a human.
Oh,
And
you cut
it is
out
a
when saying the name. Could you repeat it real quick?
affectionate companion, and it's a 1/1, and it gets a little bit bigger if you have a human. So obviously, right, dog is man's best friend. That's the whole saying, and it's a very simple design. You've got this very lovable dog. It's got this big old open mouth with the tongue sticking out, jumping in the air, having fun. Sweet dog. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a really cool way to just do a simple, effective, aggressive common. Because printing 2 power creatures of 2 power 1 drops of common starts to become a density issue. This
Mhm.
is more like it really well treads the line between this can be effective if you turn it on, and turning it on is not too difficult since humans are a very common creature type, but also the counterplay is relatively simple, which is it doesn't turn itself on in multiples, and you can kill the human to sometimes just combat trick them. So there's like
Oh, sure.
so like it plays well in just like always mechanically, and it's just really cute. And I love this alternate depiction of sweet as just like daw flavor. So yeah, I'm all around like a big fan of this card. Shout out to CyberFive.
It reminds me a little bit of Kumena Speaker, which was from Ixalan, where you get the +1/+1 if you have a merfolk or an island. And I think this is totally fine. That was actually an uncommon. I think this is totally fine. And I know you're always looking for commons in your cube here, nice playable cards.
Oh yeah, and usually tribal
So,
ones don't make it, but like I mentioned again, so many cards are humans that
mm-hmm.
this isn't really a tribal payoff so much as it is just like um, when it just makes you evaluate some cards differently, which I suppose you could say is the same as tribal, but I think that like it's not like those other cards are necessary for like human tribal. It's just that this one is like, hey, value your human pick slightly higher, which I think is a cool way of doing A plus B. Okay, so my next design is going to be back in the MSC set file, and it's Home Sweet Home, the first one without the comma, uh, designed by Hyzak. Um, or here as looks like the credit here is also COAnon, and it looks like this is also in the mtg.design file. So if you're looking there, so it's 3 Bant. For exile any number of target creatures, then return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. Each creature that enters the battlefield under your control this way enters with an additional +1/+1 counter. Each creature that enters the battlefield under an opponent's control this way enters tapped and doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. What a beautiful effect. I love this so much because um, it's such a great flavor of like, hey, come over for a feast, and then your opponent's creatures end up bloated and tired, and so they're like blug, while your creatures end up revitalized and ready for anything. I also like one thing that is, I think, a really good catcher is it isn't exile each creature, it's exile any number of target creatures. So if your opponent has like cards with good ETBs that you would prefer not to trigger, you can make that choice. If you have creatures that you want to use in combat after tapping down your opponent's thing, you can just exile your opponent's board. It's an incredibly flexible, functional, and flavorful design. So yeah, shout out to Hyzak for this design.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it seems like a pretty basic, straightforward thing. Um, Sometimes it's really nice just to get counters and get your ETBs back on there again. Bant really loves that. We've got shoot, we got a couple of Bant commanders that do that, like Derevi and uh that Rhino. I forget the Rhino's
Chulane.
name. Is that it? Yeah, but
No, wait, no, Chulane. I think the Rhino is I
Lane's
think
the
Roar.
human.
Is yeah, Chulane's a human. The Rhino is like Rom. Rom. Oh, it starts with an R, I think.
Rune the Hidden Realm.
Rune.
Yeah.
That's what it
Anyway,
is. Yeah.
so yeah. Anyways, it plays totally right into there, and then it's kind of has the uh, negative effect on your opponent's creatures, which I think is totally acceptable. It's not, I guess, not too crazy there, but yeah. I mean, it's a sorcery speed, so it's not going to be a huge combat trick, and I think most of the time you're not going to be able to take advantage of any kind of haste, which may or may not be a good thing, um, but no, I mean the flavor is really cool. Hey, coming home. Sometimes when you're just away from home, you miss it so much, and you come home, and you just appreciate it all the more.
Yeah. Overall, love it. Okay, ancestral. What is your next design going to be?
Okay. So what we're gonna do? Let's see. So let's look in MSE. We're gonna go to Loving Mother. So it is a single green mana for a bird peasant. It has Soul Bond, and it can tap for add 1 mana of any color, only if it's paired with a creature. So I think this is a pretty basic design. I just was looking for a lot of these sweet cards that weren't necessarily pastries, which I'm happy that we have plenty of food there. So this is one where it's just a sweet mother. It's a sweet bird. She's taking, I guess in the picture here, she's got a pitchfork, but protecting her little ones. The soul bond is sort of
Yeah, I think the little
the.
carrots and you can see some carrots in the pouch. So it's like,
Oh, you're right. Oh, yeah. She totally has some food there. Like she's been harvesting some food, so that really plays nicely into the tap ability. Um, yeah.
yeah. And one reason that I really like this is I think that it kind of protects from the most uh like potentially worrisome part of dorks. Like, so I guess a little bit of like a tangent is that uh I'm one of the format managers for a custom format called Revolution, which is a custom standard format. And one choice we've made there is to ban 1 mana dorks. And the reason for that is that it makes it so that it's very hard because it's really hard to balance around all 3 drops being able to come down turn 2, and that creates like a lot of burden on the format for like finding and balancing cards uh, like coming down a little early. Um, and it's just kind of like it's not like a knob that like obviously like Llanowar Elves has been like was like a standard staple for a while, but like it's just a knob that like we chose not to turn, I suppose. And I think that what I like about this is that it doesn't have that like turbo out something turn 3 because you have to play another creature first before its dork ability is online. So it feels like it still has that turn 1 ramp potential, especially if you go like turn 1 this into a 2 mana dork, you can still like drop something on turn 5, or sorry, drop something with five worth 5 mana on turn 3. But um, turn 3 probably gives your opponent reasonable chance to have some interaction up. So
Well, and this would turn a this would turn another creature into a dork on turn 2, right? You could play this on turn 2, and if you had another creature on turn 1, then you could tap the other creature for mana.
Wait, the other creature doesn't gain the ability, right?
Oh, you're right. Okay, never mind. I see. I thought this was. I thought maybe this was a little bit crazier. You're right. Yeah. So actually, never mind then. That's not a concern. Yeah. If anything, this is probably a more fair elvish mystic, I guess, because I mean I know that or Llanowar elves that in some formats it's just a little too aggressive. It probably could easily be a common, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, shout out to Astrid with the B for this design. Oh yeah, also I almost forgot that you were the one who suggested this because this is also on my list. So
Oh,
I definitely was a big fan of this one. Um, okay, next up, we're gonna go to Tricky Treats in the MSE file. Uh, so let me scroll over there. It's 0 mana artifact. It's a food, so you can. It has the sack gain 3 life ability, but you can also either sack it for green to buff up a creature that you have, or sack it for black to debuff or remove an opponent's creature. This just felt like a simple modal utility card. It reminded me a lot of what was the Eldraine card? It was Golden Egg, I think, the one that was like a fixing food. Um,
the Gilded Goose,
no,
or
no, no, no.
no.
It was I think it was either common or uncommon that like uh, did like it was like yeah, it was a food and it also fixed. As far as I remember. Um,
Oh, Golden Egg.
Golden Egg, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, this just is like uh, being. I think being instance, both of the abilities being instant speed is a little much, but I guess at uncommon it might be fine. Um, but yeah, the ability for this to just like be super flexible and either be like removal for a cheap value engine, or to like buff up your creature so that it can like get over and not trade with an opposing one, um, or just like yeah, it's just I think I value like how flexible this is for something that's so cheap, and like the abilities are small, but they're also abilities that are meaningful. I guess is what I'm getting at. So yeah, shout out to MadOlaf for this design.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of like Subtle Strike, where you can give a creature -1/-1 or +1/+1. The yeah, just I guess it doesn't seem too crazy because basically it's almost like having a double face card or possibly a triple face card, because you could either, I mean, it does nothing until you either pay a black or pay a green or pay two generic mana. So um yeah, I mean, I obviously like decks that really care about food probably like it just for having the food for doing other things with it. But yeah, it's a very basic design. Obviously, working with both of those counters make it a little confusing, but beyond that, I think it's kind of fun.
Okay, what is your next card going to be?
Okay. Um. Well, we'll go with another sweet card here, and uh, it's a little bit of a different kind of sweet. Well, I don't know. Actually, it kind of marries the both definitions. So this is Madolche Marmalmaide, which is in MSE. Human Citizen 2/2. If it would be put into the graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it in your library, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, put up to one target creature card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. So, as a 2/2, not very intimidating, but I guess the idea is that she keeps coming back, and maybe it's more like people keep coming back to her for more, right? Making all these delicious sweets, but uh, and just kind of taking stuff from the graveyard, putting it back into your library. maybe one way to think of this is, and here I'm not an expert baker, but marmalade, it's marmalmaide, preserving food, right? So it's making preserves from fruit.
Yeah, and another thing that I like is that you can also like use it as like repeatable grave hate on a bear, um, or you can use it to shuffle in high value cards that you want. Um, so I think the overall like flexibility of this card is really high for a bear, but it's not flexibility that makes it too powerful. It's flexibility that adds to the play pattern of the card, which is something I really appreciate. Um, and once again, this is another design by thenobletheif, who is working on translating Yu-Gi-Oh cards into Magic. So this is Madolche is kind of like an archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh. So
Okay.
this is one of the key cards from it. But yeah, okay. So for my next card, let's see. Let's do Candy Cavalier from the MSC file. Um, so this is a whopping 3/2 for 1 red, and you're like, oh lord, that is a very aggressively sided creature. But then, whenever it attacks, defending player creates a food token. So essentially, they can let this through and fog its damage, as long as they have 2 mana to pay. Um, which I think it's very strong in the early game when opponents don't have spare mana and actually need to like develop their game plan. But as the game goes on, um, they can like easily find spare mana to start sinking into the foods and perhaps recoup a lot of the early damage that Candy Cavalier did. Also, not having haste or evasion makes it a very easy to trade. And if you trade with it, since it's not a combat damage trigger, you'll still get the foods, and you can like uh, maybe even like delete a bolt or two in addition to the life damage that Candy Cavalier dealt.
Yeah, actually, it's kind of clever. I think that the right way to play this right is very aggressively in a very aggressive red deck. The I guess the card probably backfires if it's a little risky, right? Because if you say you attack and your opponent has an answer, uh, they can get some food for free, or if they've got like large defenders, then this is kind of a useless card. But uh, I like that it's an elemental knight. It's a candy elemental.
Yeah, like I love like it reminds me of like all those things where it's like, yes, the 5 elements, the earth, air, water, wind, and candy. And it's like, hold on, what? Excuse me? So yeah, shout out to Provocative for this design. What is your next one going to be, Ancestral?
All right, so on MTG.design, we'll look at Sirdul the Glutton, which is 2 and a black for legendary creature Salamander. It's a 6/6 with cumulative upkeep. Sacrifice a food token, and then you can pay 2 and sacrifice a creature to remove an age counter. Activate only as a sorcery. So the whole idea here is that Sirdul, a 6/6 for 3, so that's pretty darn good. It's above curve, but Sirdul is hungry, and you have to keep feeding Sirdul. And if you don't feed Sirdul, well, Sirdul will die, and so you want to keep the monster happy. I just like the flavor here. I like that it's a salamander. I like the kind of the clever take here on cumulative upkeep. It plays with the age counters. I like that if you don't have food, you can sacrifice creatures. So a little morbid here, but if you don't have tasty,
Wait, can you? Because you still have to pay the cost even if you sacrifice a creature, right? Which is kind of like my issue with it because you put an age counter on it, um, and then like is there's not like a window in between putting an age counter on it and when it checks when you
oh,
so
I
like
see, because you can only be activated as a sorcery.
Yeah, so my thing is like I almost wonder if like sacrifice a creature uh like create a food token would be better and then you like pump the stats a
Right.
little bit so that you have to you
Yeah.
have to keep making more and more creatures into food.
Or
But
or
the,
maybe just take away the sorcery clause. Like maybe it's okay to just. I mean, paying two. That's not a cheap thing that you can just for a sack outlet. But
yeah,
yeah,
but like
either way.
even if you make it instant speed, is there a window between putting an age counter and then having to pay the age count or like when it checks the number of age counters on it?
Oh,
'Cause,
I see what you're saying. You might be correct there.
like I
Uh,
don't know because like I've not played that much with age counters and especially not in formats where you can also counter manipulate. But like if that is the
mhm.
case, then even the instant speed would be the thing might be like sacrifice sacrifice an artifact token or creature, which takes away
Yeah.
the direct food flavor a little bit, but also
Hmm.
like makes it so that it's a little bit wider and like there isn't this weird kind of like you need to have foods need to have explicit food synergies elsewhere to make this tick.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Certainly, there might be some knobs to tweak here.
But yeah, the
So
core
do not.
concept of like, I'm gonna become more and more gluttonous until I eat myself is just a great concept, and I've been harping on flavors and mechanics, and this does a great job of that. But yeah, okay. So for my next design, we're gonna stick in the mtg.design file and then go to Tubechannel Shaka. So this is made by none other than one of our other Beacon of Creation contributors who also hops on the show sometimes, Mark Confidant, and taking the idea of sweet in a different direction. So when Tubechannel Shaka enters a battlefield, target creature you control gains flying until end of turn. When this creature attacks, you may cast its transformed face for 2 and a blue. Um, and its transformed face is. Oops, I actually lost it. 1 second. Its transformed face is
Hang 10?
Hang 10. That's it. I, I didn't write down the name of the transformed face because I assumed it would be a DFC in the file. It was not. Okay, so it's an instant trick where you essentially draw a card, and then once the spell resolves, you return to the battlefield tapped, transformed, and attacking, which is I I thought that it was a little bit clunky for something that could be done with like an adventure frame where it's like whenever you like attack, you may pay 2 and a blue. If you do cast this creature's trick, um, or like whenever this attacks, you may cast its trick, and then its trick is like 2 and a blue. This, but the explicit flavoring reason for that is because it's supposed to feel like an actual like flip, like a surfboard flip. So yeah, I like so which is well, I think that usually I'd be like, oh, the mechanical complexity isn't worth flavor. I'll give it a pass this time. It's some sweet catching some sweet waves. So overall, I think the idea of like expanding like things that would normally be activated abilities into spells is a knob that is sometimes not necessary, and sometimes if you design around it can actually be very interesting with like prowess-esque effects or stuff that cares about when you cast spells. So I think it's not just something you use willy-nilly, but I think if you're using it in an environment where you like control for it and make incentives for it, it can do some really interesting things. So yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like that. The You get rewarded for the trick, right? So it's drawing a card. It was so sweet. Um, at first, I thought maybe it was like a dolphin going for air, but no, it's definitely a shark. So a shark on a surfboard. uh, but yeah, it seems like a pretty fun and I guess not really crazy of a design. I guess it's transforming a lot, but I guess the whole idea is right. You do a flip. You do a flip. You're flipping the card. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's kind
And
of
also
fun.
the ETB ability triggers each time you flip it. So that's kind of also like a little hidden thing that comes in.
Oh, with the flying. I see. So you could attack, and then you could give one of your attacking creatures flying. Okay, that's kind of fun. We see that sometimes on white commons. There
Yeah,
might be a
trusted
blue
Pegasus and
one.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, that works.
Yeah. Overall, shout out to Mark Confidant for this fun design, for this sweet design, I should say. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
ancestral. What is your next card going to be?
So let's go with Corrin Exuberant Chef. So 2 green-white legendary creature halfling citizen. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token. If the creature's toughness was 4 or greater, create 2 food tokens instead. When you sacrifice a food, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. It's a 2/3. And I like that this is sort of taking Witch's Oven, but changing it. So Witch's Oven, like when you sack a creature, if it was power 4, toughness 4, one of the two, you would get 2 food tokens instead of 1. So, and I guess the idea here is that the more people that come to eat the food, the more successful you'll be, and then when they eat the food, they feel really good, right?
Yeah, it's overall just like a really. It's a simple design, but like a solid design as well. And I like that it's like, um, instead of being like, we're gonna sacrifice the creatures and cook them into a meat pie, it's like, oh, yes, come, welcome to our restaurant. Oh, you're so big, you're going to need some more food, and it's just like, yeah, and and then they leave heart, and then when they eat the food, they're like, wow, that's good food. I'm hearty, and I feel appreciated. It's really simple mechanically, but in a way that like is still resonant and plays well. So I appreciate like I imagine that like the food that Corrin cooks, um, this card is doesn't have a lot of frills, but is full of love. So shout out to NicolGoatlas for the design.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my next card is going to be sticking in the MSC file, and it's Friendly Rat. So let's head over there. This is a really simple design. Um, 1 black. At the end of your turn, which I probably should be like at the beginning of your end step, you may exile a Friendly Rat. If you do, at the beginning of your next upkeep, return Friendly Rat to the battlefield and create a food token. Um, I think this is one of those things where it's probably better as like green or white, because I suspect that this is black only because it is a rat, but the repeated food creation, while not a break per se in black, makes a lot more sense in one of those colors, as does like the friendly part of it. Um, and maybe should be like 1 more mana, because even though it's a slow value engine, it's one that's immune to sorcery speed removal, which I think is definitely a relevant piece of balancing on this. But the flavor of this is really cute. It's just like you're like I imagine it's like one of those things in like a fantasy story where like the main character's alone in a prison cell, and then it's like, oh little rat, you can come and go as you want. If only I was free. And the rat comes back and like brings the main character a bit of cheese, and it's like, oh, I'm saved. And then the character like looks where the rat is going and finds an escape route that way. I feel like I don't know. I feel like this is a very specific scenario I'm listing out, but I also feel like I've seen it in like dozens of fantasy books. So this definitely resonated with me. That trope.
I'm a little I guess I'm a little I've missed out, I think. I'm pretty good with watching most all the Pixar films, but the one I have not seen is Ratatouille, and I'm wondering if this might be a nod to Ratatouille, where it's all about cooking and there is a rat that helps the human, and so maybe this is a nod to that. I think you're right though. It's probably a little bit strong for 1 black mana, because I think there's, I mean, the the cat that we had, the cat, the whole oven cat combo that we had from Throne of Eldraine,
Yep,
that
yep.
cat was really troublesome. and I feel like this friendly rat would also be a troublesome rat. But that being said, up the mana cost or do something differently, and could still be a lot of fun to have. And I guess I would agree with you. The effect is maybe a little bit more in white's pie or maybe green's pie, although rats are a little bit more flavorfully in black.
Yeah. Overall, shout out to DrCray for this design. And what's your next design going to be?
Well, let's see. Let me go back to my file here. Um, well, we'll go with a card that I don't think it's really in the color pie anymore, but it is, I guess, flavorfully it makes sense. So maybe we can talk about this. This is Honeybee, so it's 1 and a green for an insect. It's a 1/1 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, it deals combat damage to a player. Create a food token. So, so capturing the flavor here of bees making honey, and I know we've got a few of these designs here, but I think this does a pretty good job. It sort of reminds me of the halfling citizen that we had from the innkeeper from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Maybe this isn't going to be a common, but bees make food, and there's probably not a better way to do this.
Yeah, and I think for pie concerns, I think that like we saw like even in AFR there was like the uncommon green dragon which has flying, but outside of like kind of like being priced out of being relevant and limited, plus outside of like specific flavor cases, in addition to that, green doesn't really get flying, and I think that's something that's both this cheap of a flyer and also kind of like this good of a flyer, like not only on ETB but also on combat damage on an evasive creature getting foods. That's a pretty good engine. Um,
Hmm.
I think I appreciate the overall flavor concept, but this is one of those things where like I would want to do a lot of retooling to make it like more in line with pie and a little more balanced. But
How would you compare this to Gilded Goose? So, I mean, Gilded Goose also makes food. You just have to pay 2 mana to make the food, where this has to attack and get in.
I mean, I think Gilded Goose was also fairly format defining because of its like mana dork ability. Um,
Mhm.
though obviously Goose pumping out food was strong, but you also had to throw mana into it. While engines that don't require mana investment, like even though there's a thing of like, well, what if they just play a blocker? Um, the reality is just in most of the cases, if it's playable, those conditions won't be as relevant or they won't be insurmountable, and as a result, you can just keep curving out and playing while also generating value. So I think that's where I would draw it, and also, yeah, having I think Gilded Goose is also like a great example of like when does green get flying? When it's effectively reach, so they have 0 power. And this one, like more than that, it also specifically cares about
Sure.
combat damage. So it's like play this aggressively. So
Sure. Fair enough.
I almost wonder if this was like intended to be like kind of breaky as like a throwback to old Magic.
Right, right. I
Especially
mean, we had
since like what is like there's like drop of honey. There's also some other like there's like the what is Hornet Sting is the green 1/1 damage thing.
and Hornet Queen, which that created 1/1 insects. Killer Bees, right? Killer Bees was one of the old cards that.
Yeah, I feel like in general, lots of like the old green breaks were related to like wasps or bees. So with that, especially since GoMate, I feel like has done has felt like pretty on the money on previous designs. I'd be willing to like believe that this is like intentional design, like sorry, not just intentional design, but like intentional informed design, and this is like meant to be like kind of a sweet throwback to,
Mm-hmm.
but like you obviously using the mechanics and templating of new magic. Okay, so my next design is going to be from the MSC file. It's going to be Work the Ovens. So let's head over there. This is a 3-mana red enchantment. You can pay 2 and a red, tap an untapped creature you control, deals 2 damage to target opponent, put a baking counter on Work the Ovens. Then you can pay red, remove a baking counter from Work the Ovens, create a food token. Its abilities cost 1 less to activate this turn. I love stuff that like says its abilities cost 1 less to activate this turn or whatever. That sort of like cost reduction feels like super meaningful and exciting to me because it takes the usual rate of things and then like transforms it in a cool way that also allows for like splashy or explosive moments in gameplay. I also think there's like the general thing of like it's an enchantment which generates you value and can close out games, but it has like this like flavorful but also like deliberately mechanical thing of like, oh okay, you have to like work the bellows and get the fire up, and then you can like start grinding out your opponent by like gaining life while they're losing it. Also notably is that it's not limited to sorcery speed, so you could actually play this in like, I think like red usually gets like aggressive decks, but you could play this in like red defenders or something where you like have a bunch of big creatures that can block opposing stuff. On their end step, you tap it to deal 2 damage, and then you make a bunch of food tokens to fog away if they start to like pull away from your defenders. So yeah.
Yeah, pay 3, tap a creature to deal 2 damage. This would slot in really well to like a blue-red spells deck. And if we don't really see Death Touch that much in red, but I suppose if it was paired with a color that had Death Touch, then it says that creature deals 2 damage.
It also says to target opponent. So
to an opponent, so that's not going to matter.
Waiting for the eventual Death Touch. When Death Touch creatures deal damage to a player, that player loses the game. Errata. It's coming someday.
Right. Right. Infect. Right. So this would, or is infect only combat damage? I think infect is just any damage.
I don't know.
Yeah. But anyways, the fact that you can deal damage there late game, right? When there's board stalls or what have you, that's really nice. Or if your opponent doesn't attack you, you've got something you can do with your mana. Yeah, you're right. This does feel like a very defensive card. Just being able to create the food tokens, and you can sack them to gain some life. So this seems like a pretty good card when there's parity, or even when you're behind. But probably not until mid or late game.
Yep. And shout out to Calypso, or as they go on Discord, Nemeia Starag for this design. Okay, what's your next card going to be?
All right, so on mtg.design, there's a card called Artificial Flavor, which is 2 and white, blue, so double hybrid, white-blue. It's an enchantment. It is a silver-bordered card. Non-keyword abilities of creatures and artifacts with keyword abilities are flavor text. They're no longer abilities. So basically, every kind of text on the card is a flavor text. I think, if I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah, other than like, it looks like other than like keyword, meaning like evergreen keyword.
Mm-hmm.
Which is also why it says French vanilla in the art. Because everything that isn't like an evergreen keyword gets poofed. Yeah, I'm honestly surprised I didn't see more things with like referencing flavor text, and so this was like a lot of fun. And yeah, it feels
Yeah,
like it feels like an effect that obviously like we've been mentioning, like lots of stuff in Silver Border is stuff that like almost makes the cut in like black border or normal rules, but you have to like go a little extra distance to intuit it. And this feels like one of those, and that it feels like it'll play pretty interestingly. It's like it's it's humility, but without the ability to like make power and toughness less relevant.
mhm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. This just feels like a really functional design for a silver border and a really fun one as well. Like fun in terms of like its tongue in cheek flavor. So yeah.
So yeah, the triggered. I wonder if this is missing it slightly. So triggered abilities won't trigger, at least on this card, and but on creatures anyway. Well, I guess on anything. No, on creatures. So talking about creatures, if they have some sort of like enters the battlefield effects, those won't happen. If they have keyword abilities, then it will. So like if it had riot or first strike or trample or whatever, those would still be there. And then artifacts with keywords or flavor text, but the triggered abilities don't change. So I'm not sure what the idea here is, but I guess I look at the flavor text and it says, Hell is a coffee shop and only stocks French vanilla, and it's got a picture of the French vanilla creamer. And French vanilla cards in Magic basically are considered they're just vanilla creatures except when they enter the battlefield. So like for example, if you had an Auramancer, when it enters the battlefield, return an enchantment from your hand. Or if you had Ravenous Chupacabra, enters the battlefield, destroy a creature, right? After that, it's just a vanilla creature. It's just a 2/2. And so I kind of wonder if maybe if they were kind of going the French vanilla slant, like it should just be, everything's a vanilla creature. Um, I'm not sure how you'd word that, but all the same, I
Where it's
think
like
this is still pretty fun.
creature cards in all zones lose all non keyword abilities.
Hmm. Well, and what you want to keep would be you want to keep the triggered stuff when it enters the battlefield, right? So you wouldn't want to take away the Ravenous Chupacabra from destroying something, but you'd want to, um, if you had a different creature with an activated ability or some sort of other triggered ability later on. Yeah, I don't know, but still, I mean, this is a really interesting and fun kind of card. Uh, it's unique. I don't think we've seen any other cards like this. It's not something I would have thought of.
Okay, yeah. Um, and so my next card is going to be from the MSC file, and it's going to be Sweet Slash Sour, designed by JQ. At least I think it's JQ. Let me check that one more time. Um,
Yes.
Okay, cool. Glad I remember that right. Okay, so this is a split card where the sweet side is target player creates 3 food tokens for 4 mana. Pretty strong life gain, but or just like artifact synergies, but yeah, it's a fine rate. And sour, target player may sacrifice a creature. If they don't, they discard a card and lose 3 life. Repeat this process for each artifact they control.
Mm.
And now the target player on the front half, it's like, oh, that's why. And I love this idea of like you're like giving someone food, but then it like goes bad or is poisoned, is kind of the flavor here. So I like that idea, and I like that it's a repeat this process for each artifact they control instead of each food they control. So that's a little bit more. It has like more utility as like a sideboard card as well, like, and I think this is kind of interesting as a split card that has like, well, I think maybe the front side could be like 1 green, create 2 food tokens or something like that. Maybe that's too good a rate. But I'm just thinking of like it would be interesting if this like more cheaply if the front side was more cheaply costed so that you can fuse it more often, and also so that it's like a very interesting sideboard card where the front half works well against aggro, the back half works well against artifact decks. So, but overall, I think the overall design, despite whatever minor tweaks I'd make, is like a solid combination of flavor and function.
Yeah, the sour seems quite strong that against the right player, I mean, they could be sacrificing quite a few creatures. Trying to think if 3 mana is appropriately costed for that ability. I know certainly in Commander and such, it's not uncommon for people to have 3-4 mana rocks and other kinds of equipment, and all of a sudden you're having to sacrifice quite a lot, or discard a card and lose 3 life. This is kind of the effect that we saw from, I think it was Amonkhet block that had the Hailfire of Torment, that Torment ability, which I like. I think that is kind of cute. 7 mana seems like quite a bit for all this, but individually I think they seem quite strong. So maybe this is a scenario where it's very close to being appropriately costed, because individually it feels pretty good, but together it seems a little strong. But I mean, obviously give your opponents the artifacts, and then I guess if they have the mana, they can sack the artifact in response instead of sacrificing the creature. So I guess that's the way out.
Yeah, especially since if they sacrifice the artifact, um, they don't have to sacrifice a creature. They don't like go through the process an extra time. So,
Mm.
and since if they already, unless you're playing like sour first, um, if you're playing like sweet into sour, or like let's say you're like playing, unless you're like fusing it, if you're playing like sweet one turn and then going into and then they know that you have sour potentially, in the sense of like, oh, there's no reason for them to give me food tokens unless they potentially have sour in their hand, like another copy of this card. So I'm gonna hold up
Right.
mana so I can sack in response if I need to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think you have to kind of have the mana. Like it totally makes sense. You want to, when if sour is being casted, you want to get rid of your artifacts ASAP.
Okay, and we're right up on time, so we'll make this the last card of the day. So what have you got for us?
Well, should I highlight my own card? Is that cheating?
No, that's totally cool. Go for it.
All right. So we're going to talk about Candyland. This is in both the file and the website. Legendary land. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a food token. You can tap it, sacrifice a food, add 1 mana of any color, and then whenever you sacrifice a food, you gain 1 life. Sweet dreams is the flavor text. So I like the idea that there's a lot of candy abundant, and I think that the idea being that you have to use the candy to get mana seemed kind of the right way to do it. It might be a little bit overpowering, just because it's like basically a candy factory. But yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts here, Caillou?
My thing is, it's hella busted as it is right now, but it feels like it's one or two steps away from being very compelling. Main things I'd point to are the food production being free and uh, it being an untapped, like, add any color land. Though I guess it's not really untapped since you need a food first for it to really be untapped. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
it's 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 weird because like I almost like I think the fact that the foods have abilities outside of what it does with this is almost what like throws me off slash makes me think, huh. But like I don't know. Like I like it's hard to evaluate just because like I almost feel like not to use another food pun, but it almost feels like it's too feast or famine in some situations. And I kind of
Excuse
wish
me.
the middle case was a little uh more reasonable, I guess.
Yeah. I had some thoughts with regards to this. So one would be kind of forget the last ability. So Basically, you're not gaining 1 life every turn. Essentially, if you were to, you could just sack the food each time and just gain a life whenever you add that mana. Although I do kind of like that it makes your food sweeter. So from a flavor perspective, that seems kind of fun. But perhaps if I got rid of that last ability, maybe that would make it a little bit better. The other thought would be have a limit on the number of food you can create. So maybe you can only create food if you don't have a food, or maybe you can only create food if you have a certain number of food, or something like that. But after I kind of put this together, I realized this is not that dissimilar from Gilded Goose, which we talked about earlier. Because the Gilded Goose, you could tap it to create food, and then sack the food to add a color of any mana. But otherwise, other people suggested maybe
so what you're
having...
saying is we make this land boltable.
And give it 0 power, and you can attack with it. So one thought that people had was, what if you paid mana to get the food, which might be fine. I guess the one thing to consider is if you aren't sacking the food to Candyland, then you're like, let's say if you decided, I don't want to sack this food, I want to stockpile this food, then you're not, the Candyland doesn't tap for mana on its own. So I guess it's kind of like losing a land, if you will. But I think you're probably right. Probably if I were submitting this, if I was a designer at Wizards or something, I would probably have to iterate this another time, and then probably some playtesting would do it some good.
Yeah, but overall, I think it does a really good job of capturing that, like, just Candyland is just such an iconic, like, place, and I love the idea of just, like, how would we translate that into Magic? Just never-ending food/fun. So, yeah.
When I was a really young kid, I didn't own the Candyland board game. Not the Candyland. This wasn't specifically referencing the board game, but when I was a kid, I was like, oh man, I really want to play Candyland. Like, that would be really fun. And then I think as I got older, I don't know, I must have gotten a lot older, but my best friend had a younger sister, and we were bored, or we were at her house or whatever, and so we played Candyland with her, and I'm like, my God, this is so boring. Wow, like, this is an extreme letdown. Like, and of course, at that point, I was a lot older, so hopefully this land isn't a letdown. It sounds like it's probably not. So.
I know that Candyland is definitely, like, there's these YouTubers I watch, Blind Wave, and they sometimes play board games, and they have a running gag where it's like, we're playing Candyland today, and they'll just, like, slap it out of the way. It's like, nope, we're playing something else, because, like, lots of them have strong opinions on the design of Candyland. I think Candyland is kind of like a really good template if you're designing a board game. But it's...
Right.
But, like, yeah, I never owned it, always just had it at school and stuff. But anyways, we're rambling about stuff. Once again, thanks everyone for watching and checking out these recaps. If you want to see all of the cards we discussed today, designer credits for them, the full files we pulled them from, and instructions on how you can submit your own cards to potentially be considered for future episodes, check the description. Once again, thanks Ancestral for joining me, especially since this is sort of an awkward recording time. And double thanks to Ancestral and single thanks to Cajun for setting up MTG.design and LackeyBot to MSE conversions respectively, without which we wouldn't have been able to do these episodes on the daily. But yeah, other than that, I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.